disrupted.
America that I fought.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. And guess what? Mass surveillance is getting worse than you thought, folks. After a new bill bipartisanly, and you know how good bipartisanship always works. You know, it's the best way to screw over the entire population. When two parties of the same sponsors and donors and warlords and lobbyists compel together to do the worst of the worst for the people, it pops out this. And this was tweeted out from the senator, Ron Wyden, who I believe is the senator for Oregon, I do believe. He says this bill that's underneath here, this bill represents one of the most dramatic and terrifying expansions of government surveillance authority in history. I will do everything in my power to stop it from passing the Senate. So this is in reaction to the House votes 273 to 147 to extend FISA Section 702 surveillance powers for 2 years after rejecting an amendment to bolster warrant requirement when spying involves U.S. persons. And that goes to this article here from NBC News, also pointing out that House votes to renew FISA spying tool after earlier Republican revolt. Prior to passage, the House failed to adopt a bipartisan amendment to curtail warrantless surveillance inside the U.S. Section 702 of law expires on April 19th unless it's renewed. Which it sounds like it's not going well. It sounds like that warrants are no longer a thing and it's just mass surveillance on all because of, you know, January 6th and all the other things that we have to fearmonger people to make us give up our rights. So, this lady, Elizabeth Gotein, is the co-director of Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. And she did this little Capel kind of thread here about what all this means. So she said, buried in the Section 702 reauthorization bill passed by the House on Friday is the biggest expansion of domestic surveillance since the Patriot Act. Senator Wyden calls this power terrifying, and he is right. I'll explain how this new power works. Under the current law, the government can compel electronic communication service providers that have direct access to communications to assist the NSA in conducting Section 702 surveillance. So that means things like cable companies, telephone companies, your internet service provider, anything you have a connected service to that has your information. They can compel those companies to take your information from that company and give it to the NSA. That's kind of what that entails. In practice, that means companies like Verizon and Google must turn over the communications of the targets of Section 702 surveillance. The targets must be foreigners overseas, although the communications can and do include communications with Americans. So that's the big red flag problem right there. Though a seemingly inconspicuous change to the definition of electronic communication surveillance provider, an amendment offered by House Intel Committee leaders and passed by the House vastly expands the universe of entities that could be compelled to assist the NSA. If the bill becomes law, any company or individual that provides any service whatsoever may be forced to assist the NSA surveillance, as long as they have access to equipment on which communications are transferred or stored, such as routers, service, cell towers, etc. That sweeps an enormous range of U.S. businesses that provide Wi-Fi to their customers and therefore have access to equipment on which communications translate. Barbershops, laundromats, fitness centers, hardware stores, dentist's office, the list goes on and on. It also includes commercial landlords that rent out the office space where tens of millions of Americans go to work every day. Offices of journalists, lawyers, nonprofits, financial advisors, healthcare providers, and more. When the amendment was first unveiled, one of the FISA court amici, I'm assuming that means like judge, one of the FISA court amici took the highly unusual step of sounding a public alarm. So even people in FISA, even people doing the mass surveillance are noticing how bad this is. They're the ones that are sounding a public alarm on their surveillance. If that doesn't tell you how insane this is. Civil liberties advocates noted that the provision would encompass hotels, libraries, and coffee shops. The version HPSCI leaders offered Friday therefore exempts hotels, libraries, shops, and coffee shops, plus a handful of other establishments. But as the FISA court amicis promptly pointed out, the vast majority of U.S. businesses remain fair game. The amendment even extends to service providers who come into our homes, house cleaners, plumbers, people performing repairs, and IT service providers have access to laptops and routers inside your homes and could be forced to serve as a surrogate spy. None of these people or businesses would be allowed to tell anyone about the assistance where they were compelled to provide. They would be under a gag order, and they would face heavy penalties if they failed to comply with it. That's not even the worst part. Unlike Google and Verizon, most of these businesses and individuals lack the ability to isolate and turn over a target's communications, so they would be required to give the NSA access to their equipment itself, or to use technologies or devices presumably provided by the NSA to copy and turn over entire communication systems or communication streams and or repositories of stored communications, which would inevitably include vast quantities of wholly domestic communications. The NSA having wholesome access to domestic communications on an unprecedented scale would then be on the honor system to pull out and retain only the communications of approved foreign targets. And she says, let that sink in. So that means the NSA, they're going to pick and choose who exactly they're targeting and claim it as foreign agents, as foreign spying, as target towards them. Just like how they said with the Patriot Act, we were only going after the terrorists. We're only going after people that are committing atrocities within the United States. What they didn't tell you is that opened the door and flooded the idea that we were going to mass surveil everybody. And that's what included. That was what Edward Snowden was pointing out when he released the NSA files. That was what all these journalists and reporters that have came out discussing about the surveillance state. This is what they have been telling you about. That anytime they mention about, oh, we're going after certain targets, it's just a facade. It's opening the floodgates to let you know that, hey, if we're going to do it to this guy, we're going to do it to every guy. Because that is how the NSA operates. That's how they blackmail you. That's how they curb people from doing anything. That's how they have control. That's how J. Edgar Hoover was the most powerful individual within the intelligence community, was because he had information on everybody, and he was able to blackmail and manipulate anybody he wanted to do his own bidding. And they're even saying that, plumbers and electricians and people entering houses could be enacted as a spy for the NSA. She goes on by saying HPSCI leaders denied that the administration has any intent to use this provision so broadly. Yeah. Supposedly, there is a single type of service provider that the government wants to rope in, but they didn't want anyone to know what that service provider was. So they hid the real goal by writing the amendment as broadly and vaguely as possible. But no worries, Americans. The administration isn't actually going to use all the power. It just persuaded the House to give it. I cannot overstate how mind-blowing, irresponsible that is. I don't think any administration should be trusted with an Orwellian power like this one. But if it is this administration doesn't plan to make it full use of it, go ahead and fill in the blank. That awful China. This is again, this is what amazes me. They banned TikTok, a social media application where people were just dancing and making, punny jokes. They banned a social media platform for Chinese surveillance while this was moving forward. Do you see how you live in a banana republic? Do you see that the people that are telling you who the enemies are your enemies? You should not be trusting any one of these people. Any one of them. They're telling you that China is the problem of mass surveillance. These people have been mass surveilling people for decades. They tapped into Angela Merkel's phone. They tapped into phones all across the world. And now they're doing mass, unbelievable surveillance on ordinary Americans and painting it as foreign targets. That's what I'm seeing about this. It's literally amazing. They're gonna ban TikTok because that social media influence was bad, but Facebook and Google and Microsoft and all the other applications out there, all the other cell phone providers, all your internet service providers, your cable outlet, any of them could give your data away to the NSA to do the worst of the worst. There are certain powers a government should not have in a democracy. The ability to force ordinary businesses and individuals to serve as surrogate spies is one of them. Even if the targets are supposed to be foreigners, a power this sweeping will be abused. Exactly. That is what happened with the Patriot Act. That is why people woke up to it and realized that mass surveillance is exactly what it is. Mass surveillance. It's not trying to target certain groups. It's actually a floodgate that allows anyone to be an open target for any of their choosing. And by the way, the Patriot Act was written before the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Just keep that in mind. The Patriot Act was already drafted up before we had a reason to put the Patriot Act in place. Do you tell me it was specifically targeting terrorists? And I love, and there's going to be people out there. I love when people do this. Is that when you mention about mass surveillance, when you mention about being exposed, how your privacy is basically gone at this point from government overreach, from the intelligence agencies just using you as pawns. There's people out there that are going to defend this and say, well, if you shouldn't have anything to hide then. It's the dumbest argument I've ever heard anyone ever said. I've heard it multiple times that you shouldn't have anything to hide. If you had something to hide, then clearly you must be a target of something. If I don't have anything, it's the dumbest thing imaginable. The dumbest thing imaginable. Because with that logic, then I guess we shouldn't have private property. I guess you shouldn't have doors. Maybe we shouldn't have clothes. Just go full nudist. If you have nothing to hide. If you don't have any shame. That's not what any of this is about. It's about how the government is going to play us and blackmail us and manipulate us because they're extracting personal data at their whim to use against us. By the way, when a privacy advocate tries to get this guy, Jim Hims, to engage on this issue, here's a thoughtful and conscientious reply given by the ranking member of the HPSCI, a man who clearly cares deeply about civil liberties. And his response is to that notion, he says, you do that, but life is really too short to engage with people who need to use bombastic absurdities like satacity-like. Yes, I know exactly what is in there. Some of it is classified, and none of it is remotely statsty-like. Sell your nonsense elsewhere. I don't know what even that means. But he has an American flag and a Ukrainian flag, so that's already telling. The Senate must stop this train before it's too late. The Senate is scheduled to vote on the House bill this week. If there's an opportunity to remove this provision, senators should remove it. If not, they will vote against the bill. The White House will tell senators they have no choice other than to pass the House bill because Section 702 expires on April 19th, and trying to fix the House bill or pass different legislation would take too long. But the April 19th deadline exists only on paper. The administration has already obtained FISA court approval to continue Section 702 surveillance until April 2025. According to the administration itself, that approval grandfathers surveillance for a full year, even if Section 702 expires. So, either way they vote, even if they do a grandstanding gesture like AOC the actress, it's already going to happen. And even if they try to pretend to go against this bill, we know, thanks to people like Chuck Schumer, who have openly stated on cable outlets that the intelligence agencies run the world. The intelligence agencies manipulate and blackmail politicians to do everything they can for their agenda. And if you go against the intelligence community, if you go against the CIA and the FBI and the NSA, they have 9 ways Sunday to take every one of us down. And this is exactly how they're doing it. It is a sickening look at the oligarchy you live in, folks. And while they're pointing the finger and saying that China and Russia are the most corrupted nations in the world, and China with their surveillance and a balloon that flew over Montana, that's the worst thing imaginable, and people dancing on TikTok, that's why we have to ban it. Note what's really happening is while they're banning TikTok and pointing the finger at other nations, this is what they're doing to you. This is what they're doing to you personally. While they're screaming about mass surveillance in a foreign nation, they're doing mass surveillance on you. They are playing you like suckers. They're playing you like pawns because they have no respect, they have no initiative, they have no dignity to serve you. They're just using you as pawns to get anything they want out of you. And that's what all this is. All this personal data is collected so they can blackmail, manipulate you to do whatever they choose to do with you. They can deem you as a target. They can deem you as a terrorist. They have no laws. They have no no retort when it comes to an excuse on these provisions. They're just going to do it. And it's just absolutely sickening, which is why again, and that, the biggest thing is we need to, the obvious thing we should be doing is holding account the unsaken powers of the CIA and the FBI and the NSA and all these other government agencies that are basically turning us into this banana republic, mass surveillance dictatorship, oligarchical state. Like, this is George Orwell's nightmare in action. We should be holding these people accountable. But as Chuck Schumer said, they have 9 ways of Sunday to take you down. Even the president of the United States is being manipulated and blackmailed by these people. That's why Donald Trump spoke highly against the FISA court. That's why Donald Trump went against the CIA and the FBI. Because he knew what was up. At least he knew what was up. A game show host, a reality star, real estate mogul, knows the up and up. And people are at least starting to wake up to this. And for the people that are still trying to defend this, saying, I have nothing to hide, boy, wait till they come after you. Wait till they come after you and try to use you in their little measures. It's going to be very, 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 very interesting for you to fully understand how evil your government, it really is towards you.